Hello, everyone. Welcome again to 15 Minutes and a Big Idea. We're glad to have you with us. It's a joy to get to work through these episodes together, and I hope that they're a blessing to you. We've got a huge text today, which is going to start to unpack, and you'll see the layers continuing to develop, and it's going to have tendrils that reach into the entirety of the book and really into the entirety of our lives. And so some big concepts here. I just want to dive in. Short introduction. Like the podcast, subscribe. You guys know what to do. Like the videos, and that really helps us out. For now, I just want to dive into 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 to 21. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18 to 21. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and I will thwart the cleverness of the intelligent. Where's the wise man? Where is the expert in the Mosaic law? Where's the debater of this age? Has God not made the wisdom of the world foolish? For since in the wisdom of God, the world by its wisdom did not know God, God was pleased to save those who believe by the foolishness of preaching. When I drop into a book, there's sections I'm excited to cover, and this is definitely one of them. For the next 8 to 10 weeks, we're going to be looking at one of the fundamental mentalities that the Christians got wrong, as well as people today, and really the everyone that's not a Christian gets this wrong in some sense. Like, this is you want to know why people are or aren't Christians. This kind of boils down the text there. Moreover, it helps us understand why we're not as fully devoted to Christ as we need to be. There's going to be a lot of repetition over the next several months, but that's what Paul's doing. So we want to honor that, and we're going to see its importance. In this lead up, Paul's recounted the declaration that the Corinthians are saints, that they've been sanctified by God for a purpose, and he's recognized that Christ is powerfully and faithfully at work among them to bring about their blamelessness at the day of Christ. Paul joins this mission to make sure that they're pure at the revelation of the Lord and starts the work of untangling the web of falsehoods that the Corinthians have come to believe. Specifically, he calls out their allegiance to various teachers, to the neglect of Christ, perhaps even raising teachers over Christ. Paul finds this shocking and says that it's not about who's your favorite or who baptized you, but about following Christ. Specifically, he mentions that his call isn't to administer baptism so he can have a bunch of groupies. Rather, it's to call people into the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Even if that seems offensive, which he's going to begin to really address head on today in our big idea, which is God alone is wise. To unpack the idea that God alone is wise, we want to look at number 1. The cross is powerfully offensive. Number 2, God makes wisdom foolish. 3, worldly wisdom is a dead end. The cross is powerfully offensive. God makes wisdom foolish. Worldly wisdom is a dead end. Cross, foolish, and wisdom. This episode, as we mentioned, comes out of the last text where Paul says that when he taught the gospel, he didn't use clever or impressive rhetorical techniques because that would diminish the power of the cross. In fact, rendering it useless. It appears that there's a critique from the Corinthians. Stop talking about the cross so much. Stop teaching about it, Paul. It's not popular. You'll be more effective. We'd like it better if you didn't do that because of its offense to us, as it shows Christ is weak. Next week, we'll see this as a turnoff to both Jews and Gentiles. There were things about it that totally frisked with the worldview from beginning to end. They heard about the hero of the Christian story was this guy who's king of the universe, who's crucified and resurrected. And so that's just powerful, but for many people it was just offensive. It was just foolishness to them to hear that story. And so to give you an example kind of their response, I think about a series of movies from back in my day, which is weird to say. I don't think I'm old enough to say that. But back when I was very young, elementary school, pre-elementary school, called Air Bud. I don't know if you remember Air Bud. And it's essentially about a golden retriever that learns to play various team sports and manages, at least in the basketball and football one, I think, to gain high school eligibility and leads them to victory. And it's fun, and it's wholesome, and it's enjoyable. It's got like 2 stars on IMDb. So it's not a great movie, but it's fun and it's wholesome, which is there's a lot to be said for that. But it's just fanciful foolishness, isn't it? It's a fictional story. If I try to convince you that it happened in real life, you wouldn't listen to me. It's preposterous. A golden retriever being granted eligibility to play high school sports, and they believe that seriously. That's ridiculous. If I try to convince you that's real, you just say that can't be the case. The sort of incredulity you would probably feel is analogous to what people felt when they heard about a crucified and resurrected King of the universe. Neither one of these things really work with their worldview. And Paul says that they find it foolishness. Just like I think about a dog playing sports as foolishness, it makes a nice fictional story. I don't think it's true. It's ridiculous. But for those who are being saved, it's the power of God. This notion of foolishness and weakness versus power and wisdom will really come into play next week. But for now, we'll just note the foreshadowing. In short, Paul is highlighting that we don't have to find the cross as foolishness, and we don't because we believe it to be true. And so it has immense power for our lives, even though it's offensive. The fact that death has been historically solved in the person of Jesus means there's a power of a sort that the world has never seen and never conceived of before. Before we get to this section on wisdom and foolishness, I want to talk about the biblical conception of wisdom and how to start to do it, because it's kind of this fuzzy, abstract concept that I really struggled to understand. It'll take a little time, and hopefully we'll revisit this, but we need to have a more robust understanding of wisdom. In the most general sense, though, wisdom is about making good choices, the ability to make good choices. And in truth, really, wisdom tells you what is the good or bad that you're contributing to by your choice. I would suggest that Paul, in this case, uses wisdom as a shorthand for evaluating data and determining what action to take. Okay? I know there's a lot more we could say here. This deserves a whole episode, but he uses it as the way in which we internalize data, and then the way we process that data. The way we think about it and assess its truth and its merits, and then how we choose to move forward from that. As Paul uses it here for wisdom, we might use the word perspective, worldview, lens, but we need to keep in mind that these lenses are inseparable from the actions we take. It's not just what goes on in your head, it's how you act it out. So in verse 19, he continues this sequence of fours, 4, 4, 4, 4, giving us a causal chain to see how these things tie together. He cites Isaiah 29, verse number 14, which says that the wisdom of the wise will perish and the understanding of the prudent will be hidden. All right, so wisdom cast down, understanding cast down. In this case, people were giving false prophecies about Jerusalem's destruction at the hands of Babylon. The wise men of the day were saying it wasn't happening. God showed that wisdom was bankrupt. It was just wrong. That is, as cool as these people might have been, as respected as they were incorrect. The fact that they were wise men didn't make them right. And Paul pulls that notion forward into his context, where he's saying and shows that God has done the same thing in exalting Christ as a crucified and resurrected Messiah. God is showing that he alone is wise. And while we might make claims to wisdom, it is God alone who decides what is wise. He is the standard of wise. We might say that all of the wisdoms, all of the perspectives, all of the worldviews and lenses that people are trying to get to a capital W wisdom, the true wisdom, which actually represents how things are and how we should behave. And Paul's claim is that God has the monopoly on capital W wisdom. He's the one who's got it all figured out. His perspective is the one that's true. We might look at a set of facts from one angle and think we found wisdom, but another perspective totally turns it upside down. God's wisdom is not going to be turned upside down. He's the one who will always win. And so with that, in our third point, he presents a challenge to the wise person, to the scribe. I think the translation I read out of it today, I think I read out of the NET instead. It says the expert in the law. That's what he means by that. The debater of the age. The wise person is someone who could think, who was respected for the thoughts and ways they had untangled difficult situations before. This scribe was one who could argue from the law of Moses, who knew the law of Moses. The debater is a person who's skilled in rhetoric and can win an argument, even if they don't have the best position or the truth, because of the way they craft their arguments. These are the intellectual heavyweights of the day. And Paul is kind of like calling them to the stand to say, hey, you want to get on the other side of the debate platform with God? Let's do this thing. You're the people who would be admired as wise, but Paul says that God's wisdom shows that their perspectives are all foolishness. He's not saying that they don't have respectable intellect and that their wisdom may cause them to make valuable contributions as they accord with the wisdom of God. But if it comes to matching wits, God's going to like beat them from one side of the ring to the other and back and forth and back and forth. It's not even a fair fight. If they don't align with God, they fail to comprehend what truly matters. And God's so on top of this, though. I mean, just like think about God's wisdom here. He realizes the way they think about things, the way he thinks about things, and just the transcendence here. He's able to step back and be like, this isn't really working. This wisdom on the human sort isn't working. He sees what the wisdom of people is leading them to do, and it never leads them to God. The wisdom of the world perpetuates idolatry. It perpetuates human suffering because we're fallen. And we find ways to justify whatever we want to do. We can do the mental gymnastics is what our wisdom allows us to do. And God knows that human wisdom hits a wall because it's dominated by the flesh and pursuing its passions. It needs a revamp, which is really the theme of the next chapter. And so because this dead end, God chose to do something else. Instead of people being able to boast in how wise they are in wisdom, you get wisdom, and that's how you know God. God chose to save the world through something that the world's wisdom finds foolish, which is a guy who was crucified, died the death of a state criminal in an unimpressive way as an outcast and a reject, full of shame. And he was resurrected when people aren't resurrected, this resurrection of Jesus Christ. And as we'll see, this is where true wisdom, true power are found, that we'll see in the next several weeks. It's a really great section. I'm really looking forward to it. So here, we see an exaltation in the surpassing wisdom of God, of just how wise God is. There was a suffocating pride on the part of the Corinthians. And specifically, one of the main ways that happened was in their approximations of their wisdom and knowledge. This is something that Paul is going to rebuke them on again and again throughout this passage and really throughout the book. And Paul isn't going to change his message to suit the world because the world's wisdom doesn't get off the ground in terms of knowing God. Rather, he's going to recognize God as the arbiter of wisdom. He's going to rejoice in the greatness of the wisdom of God in Christ. Instead of modifying what the world says is foolishness, he's going to announce the surpassing wisdom of God in the death and resurrection of Christ. It's exactly the cross and the resurrection that we see the ultimate power and wisdom of God on display. And when we allow our hearts to be open to that fact, and we recognize that wisdom belongs to God alone, we've begun to have hearts which put on display the wisdom of God. We've begun to have the perspective to where we have the worldview. The blinders come off and we can see things as they truly are. And as they truly are is that the greatness and the power and the wisdom of God is shown through the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so as we think about this fundamental truth, this central event of Easter weekend being so revolutionary in the history of the world, do you see God as the ultimate source of wisdom because of that? Because of God's display of wisdom in the gospel of Christ? Do you see him as the one who has surpassing wisdom? Do you believe that God has all the facts? That he's the one who will not be put to shame? That he's the one who cannot be critiqued and shown to be wrong? So do you trust him? And do you rejoice in the greatness of his wisdom? Do you come as a critic of God, or do you come as someone who knows that God has it figured out and you just can't figure out why you can't figure it out? Do you come with confusion, seeking to mold your worldview and your perspective of the will of God, or do you seek to demand an answer of God? Will you submit to the wisdom of God, even if it seems foolishness to you and to the world around you? Is there a place in your life when it comes to the morals of the Bible, the ethics of the Bible, the fundamental tenets of Christianity, whatever it is, where you're resisting the wisdom of God? Where God is calling you into a certain behavior, or set of behaviors, or to stop a certain set of behaviors, calling you out of them, and you're just resisting because you've got all the excuses that you've made up on your own wisdom. Is there a place you need to submit to him today? Thank you so much for joining us today on 15 Minutes and Big Idea. Today's big idea: God alone is wise.